Well, joining us now is Shachi Kurl. She is the president of the Angus Reid Institute, which conducted the poll on attitudes regarding Canadian support for Ukraine. Shachi, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So here we are approaching the 2-year mark of this invasion, and your poll is really tracking the significant increase in the number of Canadians growing tired of supporting Ukraine. Now, you phrase it as Canadians who say this country is offering too much support. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, the question in itself gave Canadian respondents options, a series of options. You know, in terms of the support that we've offered Ukraine, has it been too much, too little, the right amount? Are you not sure? You know, do you have an opinion on it or not? And so that too much versus too little number was really what we were trying to remeasure, because it's a question we've asked in the past, and we've really been asking that question since the beginning of hostilities. And it's followed up by a series of questions about actual things that Canada has done or others have argued should do in terms of offering that support. So everything from sending aid to sending lethal weapons, military training, etc. All of these things have been factors. And then broadly, you just want to sort of get that broad question, you know, is it too much or too little?
Too much, too little. And we're looking at a graph right now because you've also broken this down into political parties, because you say that in terms of doing too much, more conservatives are saying that than any other party. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. So we do see a split along political lines. And, you know, politics is a pretty significant analysis that we look at through, you know, a lot of lenses when it comes to what's happening with climate policy, with foreign policy, with all sorts of things. And certainly there is a political story to be told. You know, go back 2 years or even last year when you see a very united parliament and MPs of all stripes saying, we support Ukraine. But of course, we saw last fall the Conservative caucus voting against that Canada-Ukraine trade agreement. And I think many Canadian observers were left a little bit wondering, like, what's up with that? Well, part of what's up with that is the fact that 43% of Conservative 2021 voters, past Conservative voters, now believe that Canada is doing too much for Ukraine. It's important to note that you see that across the political spectrum, but in the case of past Liberal voters, it's gone from 5 to 10%, so it's doubled, but doubled from 5 to 10%. In the case of NDP voters, it's doubled from 5 to 12%. In the case of Conservative voters, it's gone from 19 to 43%. 43% is a really significant segment. It's not the majority of Conservative voters, but it's a big, big segment. And if you are a leader, if you're a strategist, if you're an MP, it's a segment that is conservative. It's a segment you can't really ignore.
Okay, so when you looked at that, Shachi, I'm wondering if there was any reasoning that you could pinpoint here. Is that because of money spent? Is that because of the stalemate that we're seeing on the ground? What exactly are the people who are concerned about the support being given saying about their reasoning?
It's a couple of things. First of all, we know that there's a correlation between the level and the extent to which people are engaged in and dialed in and watching the situation in Ukraine on a regular basis. And certainly after the events of October 7th, the focus has been so much on the Middle East, so that we've seen people, really Canadians of every political stripe, not watching the conflict as closely. But we also noted that past Conservative voters are more likely to be watching this situation and following news on Ukraine a little bit less. We also know that people who are following the news a little bit less when it comes to what's going on the ground in Ukraine are more likely to be a little bit more hawkish and a little bit less, let's say, engaged or committed to that sense of keeping up support over the long term, no matter what it takes. So some of this is about level of engagement. Some of this is certainly, I think there is an element that speaks to that segment of the Conservative Party that aligns and feels an affinity with conservatism and particularly republicanism in the United States. Right? They're watching more U.S. news. These are folks who are more inclined to have a better opinion of Donald Trump than don't. They don't represent the entirety of the conservative base. We have to be really clear about that. But they're a segment of the Canadian conservative base. So there is that Canada first aspect of things as well, where it's like, well, why are we even in Ukraine? That is an open debate and conversation happening in the United States, where I'm speaking to you from today, but also in Canada, particularly within the ranks of the conservative base, not the Conservative Party, not the caucus or the MPs, but voters. So a lot of those voters were like, well, what are we doing? Why are we there? Why are we helping? Conservative support bases have always been made up of kind of disparate factions. You've got the small government faction. You've got the more right-wing or hard conservative faction. In the past, that faction has had more to do with issues around social values, things like anti-abortion or LGBTQ2 rights, that type of thing. But now we're also seeing some of that faction also playing a little bit more in the realm of like, what is Canada's place in the world? So while conservative voters tend to be among those who say, well, militarily Canada should be out there doing its thing, there is a segment of those folks, but there's also a segment who are increasingly a little bit more domestically focused and saying, well, what are we doing, and what is Canada's role, and should Canada have a role? And you're seeing that, I think, come through a little bit.
Well, without a doubt, when I saw the release this morning, it raised my eyebrow. Very interesting to talk to you about this, Shachi. Thank you, and good to see you as always.
Nice to see you. Thanks, Michael.